It was the movie that coined the phrase,
"Who you gonna call?"
They were a pop culture monster back in the 1980s. Ghostbusters was everywhere. From the movies, to the toys, to the video games, and the very successful 80s cartoon show. Ghostbusters, there was no movie like it before, and quite frankly, despite all the sequels, there has not been a movie like it since. A sci-fi comedy adventure hybrid. Now, I was a young kid when this movie first came out, and naturally, I was scared to watch it alone. And with scenes like these, can you blame me? So I would watch with either my mom, my older sister, or my cousins whilst cowering behind the sofa. Amazingly though, it took watching the sequel Ghostbusters 2 years later for me to finally pluck up the courage to watch the movie from start to finish without any adult supervision. Yes, I was quite the scaredy cat as a young kid. The Ghostbusters comprised of Peter Venkman, played by Bill Murray, Ray Stantz, played by Dan Aykroyd, Egon Spengler, played by Howard Ramis, my personal favourite of the group, Winston Zeddemore, played by Ernie Hudson, Secretary Janine Melnitz, played by Annie Potts, the damsel in distress Dana Barrett, played by Sigourney Weaver, and next door neighbour Louis Tully, played by Rick Moranis, and Will Atherton as Walter Peck, which complete the cast. Pete, Ray and Egon start things out with Winston joining the group halfway through the movie, which was something of a bone of contention going forward, because he only seemed to show up as things were heating up. More on that later. Okay, so we begin at the start of the movie. Now after this really cool, now opening retro Columbia Pictures opening sting, it always gave you that nostalgic feel of great 1980s movies. We open to the statue of a lion just by the New York Public Library, and there's this suspenseful music playing, almost as if it's a sign of things to come. This was kind of setting the tone. Cut to this librarian who is going deep into the library and things are spookily happening around her. As she's turning to leave, all the drawers are opening and paper is flying everywhere. She screams and starts running and makes a sudden turn, and then this happens. What a start. Now, as I'm sure most of you watching this video know how the story goes, I will be jumping ahead quite a bit, so there will be some missing parts. So if you've seen the movie, and I trust most of you have, you know how it goes. And if not, well, first go watch the movie and fill in the blanks, and spoilers. 3 scientists at a university are kicked out as the uni board feel that they are too extreme with their methods, and after initially wallowing in self-pity, they decide to go into business for themselves. Their first client is a woman named Dana Barrett. Right on cue, strange things start happening as a packet of eggs begin to open up and cook themselves, followed by a strange growling noise, and opening her fridge, and she finds this otherworldly dimension. She visits the Ghostbusters and tells them of her problems. Peter follows her back to the apartment, but there is nothing there. And him being a ladies' man, he hits on Dana, who rejects him and kicks him out. Now looking back on it, that can be considered as a sexual advance and be deemed highly inappropriate. It was the 80s and it was a very, very different world back then. Skipping ahead, the Ghostbusters are enjoying a meal when Janine alerts them to a call with their very first ghost case. Cue the music from the bus boys cleaning up the town, and we are up and running. I really wish I could play the music, but copyright, you know how that goes. Fast forward to Ray, who first spots the ghost who would go on to become Slimer. Next up, Peter encounters Slimer, and he looks really peed off. Why is he just standing there screaming like a kid? Just shoot! I don't get it. And here comes that very memorable line.
He slimed me.
Next up, after cordoning off the main dining room, the Ghostbusters proceed to go after Slimer. And after a back and forth, they end up capturing him with their ghost trap, which I have to say looks really cool. They make their first official capture, and this kicks off a chain of events that lead to their rise in popularity and a string of ghost captures, with the movie going to a musical interlude of sorts with the iconic Ghostbusters theme by Ray Parker Jr. And this is when we are introduced to the fourth member of the group, Winston Zedmore. Jadine's line here introducing him is the stuff of legends.
Do you believe in UFOs, astral projections, mental telepathy, ESP, clairvoyance, spirit photography, telekinetic movement, full trance mediums, the Loch Ness Monster, and the theory of Atlantis?
If there's a steady paycheck in it, I'll believe anything you say.
Next, we meet arguably the biggest villain of the movie. No, not a monster or a terrifying ghost, but a member of the Environmental Protection Agency, Walter Peck. And after a back and forth with Peter, who refuses to let him see the containment unit, he goes away and threatens to shut down their operations. I mean, let's face it, Peck is that corporate douchebag that you just want to punch in the face, and he goes on to prove that point later on in the movie. Now moving on and going back to Dana's apartment, here comes the first of a sequence of the more spectacular / terrifying scenes in the movie. First is the cool but spooky transformation of the statue of the first terror dog monster, Zool. Next, and probably the most disturbing part of the film, is Dana being trapped by the hands that come out of the chair and gag her and send her into the terrifying presence of Zoo the terror dog, now all freed from being a statue. Next up, the local neighbor Louis Tully is chased and cornered by the second terror dog, only his is a lot more comedic, fitting in with the movie's comedy.
Nice doggy, cute little pooch. Maybe I got a milk bone.
Peter arrives to visit Dana after they had arranged the date, and things do not go according to plan, and sees that she is possessed. Lewis, in the meantime, has ended up at Ghostbusters HQ, and he's examined by Egon, clearly showing that he is possessed by another terror dog, and that terror dog's name is Vince Clortho, the keymaster of Gozer. As I said earlier, Walter Peck is one of the main villains of this movie, and here's why. Storming in with a police escort, he manages to shut down the Ghostbusters containment facility, which leads to all chaos, with the containment unit exploding and all the ghosts that were captured being freed and running amok in New York City. In all the chaos, the Ghostbusters are arrested thanks to Peck, and Lewis and Dana, possessed by the terror dogs, come face to face for some smoochies, and the process of freeing their master Gozer the Gozerian begins. Whilst in prison, Ray and Egon explain the whole spooktacular history of the apartment and how it was designed by an architect, Ivor Shandor, as a conductor to summon Gozer and bring about the apocalypse. Now, why is it always Earth that is targeted in these sci-fi stories as one of the planets you have to destroy when there is a vast universe out there with other planets? I just don't get it. Why? In any event, the Ghostbusters are released thanks to the mayor. They get their equipment, and for the first time all 4 Ghostbusters are shown in action, and they head to the apartment to take on Gozer. But not before going through and surviving a mini earthquake, and a ton of stairs. Side note, you really do need to be in shape to be a Ghostbuster, don't you? Up on the roof, Dana and Lewis transform into the terror dogs in a spectacular sequence. and Gozer makes its appearance in the form of a woman, which Egon explains it can be whatever it wants to be. From there, it's the Ghostbusters versus Gozer. The face-off with Gozer brings about a couple of famous lines.
Ray, when someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes!
Gozer tells the Ghostbusters to decide the form of the Destructor, and somehow is able to catch Ray's thoughts about a figure from his childhood, and it's the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, in all its spectacular glory, just marching across the street, stomping on everything in its path, including a church, which sets off Peter, and now it's on. As a desperate last resort, Egon advises the only way to end Gozer is to shoot at the portal whence it came from, but they have to cross the streams. Oh, I forgot to mention, earlier in the movie, crossing the streams is not a good thing, apparently. They go for it and they shoot away, with the terror dogs just standing there and watching and not even going into attack. And Gozer is defeated, which culminates in a massive explosion, followed by a marshmallow bath, which Peck is the rightful recipient of. In the aftermath, the Ghostbusters emerged, all showered in marshmallow, minus Pete for some reason. He found a very good place to hide, I guess. Dana and Lewis are freed from the terror dogs, and Winston ends the movie with the famous line,
I love this town!
The movie ends and the Ghostbusters are cheered as heroes. Now, there's plenty of other YouTubers out there with more facts and stats about the movie. I'm just basically recapping it and giving my take. Like, for instance, you really need to be in shape to be a Ghostbuster. I mean, between going up and down that fire pole escape and in the animated show when they run quite a lot, you do have to be in tip-top shape. So munching away on Chinese food just as you're going out on a job and smoking, probably not a good idea, especially with all that movement and running involved in busting ghosts. The Ghostbusters are scientists, but from this it appears it's only Ray and Egon who do all the science and the technology. After all these years, I'm not sure what Peter did that gave the impression that he was a scientist. He seemed more interested in women, as was demonstrated at the beginning of the movie with the students. This part always annoyed me. Winston is the token black character who joins halfway through the film, and always when the action is heating up with the Ghostbusters, it was a trope which carried on into part 2. Another thing that got me was New York. It's a massive city, so with just 4 Ghostbusters and 1 vehicle, surely in some instances it would take ages to reach all their destinations, and who knows how much damage the ghosts would have caused by the time they'd reached the place, or how much damage the Ghostbusters could add on top of things. That was just a thought. Yeah, and also after their very first ghost capture, the hotel manager is charged $5,000, which the manager reluctantly agrees to pay after the Ghostbusters threaten to put the ghost back after he first refuses. Now, after all the damage they caused capturing the ghost, how were the customers compensated, especially when they had to pay extortionate prices? I mean, it's just ridiculous, and it really calls into question their business practices, doesn't it? These are just over-the-top thoughts of mine. At the end of the day, it's only a movie. One of the cool things about this film is the cool gadgets that were involved. The proton packs, the be-all and end-all of the Ghostbusters arsenal. The ghost traps, the PKE meter. Of course, there is also the vehicle, Ecto 1 with the siren. Now, these would all be part of the licensing arsenal for Ghostbusters, and they made all these wonderful toys inspired not just from the movie, but also the cartoon. Now, as far as the movie goes, looking back on it retrospectively, even though it is widely considered a comedy, it's spliced with a lot of sci-fi and mini horror with the ghosts and ghouls, and yes, it is quite funny and humorous, but it did get quite serious, and, as a child, a bit scary. An interesting fact that I discovered was the role of Winston Zeddemore was actually intended for Eddie Murphy. Given Eddie Murphy's great popularity at the time and how small the part of Winston Zeddemore was, it's hard to imagine Murphy would have been okay with such a small role. Now apparently Winston had a much bigger role in earlier drafts of the movie with a military background, and he also would have been part of the sequence involving the capture of Slimer. However, the film studios had decided to give Bill Murray a lot more screen time, which led to several script rewrites, which consequently cut down Winston's screen time. Ain't it funny how things work? Now tragically for any future Ghostbusters reunions, it will be done sadly without the late great Howard Ramis, who passed away on February 24th, 2014. He was my favourite character in the movie, and he displayed Egon with a mix of brains and awkwardness and a dry sense of humour. He will always be missed. A quick mention for the sequels. Ghostbusters 2 I will be doing a video on in the future. Ghostbusters 2016, yeah, I was not a fan. And not because it was an all-female cast. It's just because the movie was boring and unfunny to me. And it had no connection whatsoever to the Ghostbusters universe, so a big thumbs down from me. And apparently loads of other people too. Finally, there is the recent Ghostbusters Afterlife, a true sequel to the first two movies which took cues from the first film and nicely honors the late Howard Ramis. Whilst not a great movie, it is a decent watch and it left open the possibilities for more follow-ups. Now overall, Ghostbusters is an excellent movie. It's a comedy with a good mix of sci-fi, horror and suspense. It was one of the biggest movies ever during the 1980s and it created a fan base that has kept the franchise alive for decades. The comedy, the wit, the sense of adventure, the technology and everything else Ghostbusters is known for continue the enduring legacy of a great movie franchise. When there's something strange in your neighborhood,
Who you gonna call?